Will Shaw arrives in Spain to meet up with his family for a holiday. His father, Martin, comes to pick him up to bring him to the boat. On their drive over, Will gets a call from the consultant company he runs, but asks for a few hours before he calls back, as his constant business calls annoy his father. He meets his mother, Jean, brother Josh, and his girlfriend, Dara. Later, the family gathers for dinner, where the brothers reminisce about their lives growing up, always moving because of Martin's job as a consultant. Jean expresses her joy in having her family all together, and the family make a toast. Josh then brings up a funny story from Will's past when he gets a phone call, getting a bombastic side-eye from Martin. Will's phone call is not a good one, and he returns to the table in an obvious mood, shutting down the jokes. He finally confesses to them that his company is bankrupt, and he is not sure he can stay the week. He leaves the rest of the family in shock and silence as he goes to sit alone next to the sea. After dinner, Will returns to the table, apologizing to Martin for messing up dinner, and Martin apologizes for his predicament. The next day, the family is out on the sea, with Will being distracted by his cell phone. He reluctantly joins in, helping steer the boat until they finally anchor. Will again is distracted by his cell phone when Martin calls him to steer the boat. He sits behind the wheel, when suddenly a speedboat with two guys comes dangerously close to the yacht. Will is not paying attention to the steering, which begins to drift into the wind. Martin calls out to him just in time, and he manages to save Dara from being hit by the yacht's boom, causing her to hit her head. Will gets a call, but Martin throws the phone into the ocean. The two get into an argument, and Will decides to swim into town to cool off his head. He stops by the pharmacy to get antiseptic for Dara's cut before getting himself a drink. Out on the ocean, Martin sees the same speedboat fly past them and begins to get concerned. After a few minutes, Will returns to the beach, but his family's yacht is nowhere to be seen. He asks the locals on the beach, but he cannot understand their Spanish. He swims out into the beach, asking the young people, but they are of no help. Thinking he has been left behind, Will walks to another location on the beach and sees the yacht floating alone. He manages to get onto the boat, but the boat has been disabled and there is no sign of his family. Will rushes to the police station to get help, but the officers are playing cards until he gets mad. Will tells the captain his name, and the captain makes a phone call, before telling Will to take him to the boat. The officers and Will drive to the location later that night, but end up leading Will to a man. The man knows Will, claiming that he can take Will to his family who are safe. Will gets suspicious and tries to leave, but the officers grab him, forcing him to fight them off and make a run for it. He steals one of the cop cars and speeds away, with the cops hot on his tail. They manage to run Will off the road, causing him to crash. They drag Will from the car and begin to beat him up until Martin appears, taking out the cops with ease. He helps Will to his feet and they drive away. Will asks Martin for Josh or his mom, but Martin has no idea. He explains that men came onto the boat, held him hostage, and took the family. Martin apologizes, then comes clean to Will about his profession. He tells Will that he is really a CIA agent and thinks it's something he did that caught up to him. He apologizes over and over and promises to get the family back. He then gets a phone call from his contact in the CIA demanding to meet. Martin then takes Will to one of his safe houses to rest up, not explaining much. After a while, Martin has Will drive him to his meeting spot with his team leader, Carrick. Meanwhile, a sniper is setting up his gun at the location. Will and Martin arrive at the spot. He tells Will to wait in the car, but before he leaves, he tells Will that he is proud of the great son he has become. Martin goes to speak with Carrick, wondering if she set him up. Martin explains that the men they took a briefcase from took his family, and unless they return it, his family will be dead in 24 hours. Carrick explains that the briefcase is missing, but Martin demands that she fix this. As Martin walks back to his car, he is suddenly shot and killed by the sniper. Will is in shock, and he crawls to his father in tears. The sniper then fires another shot at Will, who barely manages to grab Martin's gun and ringing cell phone and escape before the sniper, Gorman, and his men chase after him. Will runs for his dear life until he gets to a safe spot and answers the phone. The man on the phone ignores his pleas for help and warns him that Martin, calling him Tom, has 24 hours to return the briefcase. Gorman catches up to him and Will takes off once more. He runs into a policeman, but the man pulls his gun, seeing Will armed. Before the cop can put him under arrest, he is shot and killed by Gorman. Will fires at Gorman, but more cops pull up and chase after Will. He runs and manages to jump a massive fence, ending up in a park. A mounted cop spots him and chases after him, and Will somehow outruns a full-grown horse and escapes. He stops at a public restroom to catch his breath, trying to process what is happening to him. After gathering his nerves, Will comes back onto the street and steals a hat and sunglasses. He ditches the gun, then causes himself to get arrested at the U.S. Embassy. Inside, he speaks with an official, explaining the death of his father and his predicament. But the official does not believe him and tells him to get legal help. The official then gets a phone call which seems to be about Will. Will leaves, and outside, he sees Carrick waiting for him in her car. She introduces herself as a friend of Martin's, even knowing Will is a child. She wants him to get in the car so they can talk about his family. But Will is hesitant. Carrick tells him that she can help save his family, and hearing this, Will gets in. Once they begin to move, Carrick begins to question Will, wanting to know who Martin talked to about the briefcase. Realizing that Carrick is not on his side, Will fakes being ill, then takes off running down the street. He takes a bus leaving the city and goes through Martin's cell phone. The phone begins to ring, and Will hears the same man on the line. He then hears his mother's voice, begging him to put Martin on the phone. Will then painfully breaks the news of Martin's death to her, and she breaks down sobbing. Will tries again, telling the man that Martin is dead, but the man just wants his briefcase. Will calls a friend of his father's named Diego and arranges with his niece Lucia to meet at his offices. Will gets to the address where he first readies his gun before meeting Lucia, who seems a bit nervous. Carrick's man then appears, but Lucia attacks him with a knife, allowing Will to also tackle him. During the fight, the man gets stabbed in the back, but manages to continue fighting Will until he runs out of strength and dies. Lucia then holds Will at gunpoint, thinking that he has also come to hurt Diego. But Will explains the situation and urges Lucia to help him find Diego. She finally relents and gives him a ride over to Diego's apartment. They realize that his door is open, and Will pulls his gun and enters, only to find Diego dead on the floor. He holds Lucia, stopping her from screaming out in anger and terror. Will then hears chattering and goes to check, only to find Carrick and Gorman in the kitchen. He holds them at gunpoint, demanding to know why they had to kill Martin, but Carrick calmly tells him that Martin wanted to return the briefcase to their enemies, and he had to be taken out. Carrick again tells him that she can help get his family back, but she needs to know who else Martin spoke to about the briefcase. Suddenly, Lucia comes in firing shots, causing a shootout. The two make a run for it, with Carrick and Gorman after them. The two get to the roof, but realize they have no way of getting down. Will gets an idea and uses a wire to wrap around Lucia, and begins to lower her down, but Gorman shoots Will in the shoulder. Lucia is helped inside by a stranger meanwhile. Will barely manages to wrap a wire around himself and escape incoming gunfire, falling to the ground painfully. Lucia jumps on her bike and they manage to escape once more. Will is not looking good, but they have no time to rest as Carrick has caught up with them and causes them to crash. Carrick tries to take a shot, but a crowd of people block her sight, and she watches as Lucia and Will get away. Lucia helps Will to a nightclub, to a friend with medical experience. Her friend is reluctant, but Lucia begs her and she calls up her friends to help. They realize that there is no bullet inside the wound, so they cauterize his wound, causing him to pass out. Will wakes up a few hours later in pain. Lucia is going through his phone when she sees a picture of Martin, and is shocked when Will confirms that he is really dead. Lucia then shockingly reveals that Martin, whom she knows as Tom, is also her father, and Will is her half-brother. The two take a train to the place where Will is supposed to deliver the briefcase, still in shock at the revelation of Martin's secret life. Will is determined to go on alone, and Lucia accepts this, telling him that she will be waiting at the club if he needs help, and wishes him luck. Will gets to the location, looking around for anyone, when a man comes up beside him, telling him to act normal and follow him. Will reluctantly follows the man to a car and is directed to sit in the front. Will asks for his family, but the man grabs him around the neck and chokes him out. Will wakes up tied to a chair, being punched repeatedly, trying to convince the men that Martin is really dead. The leader, Zahir, turns out to be a Mossad agent, and the briefcase was a part of a ploy to draw out a corrupt CIA agent, when Martin and the CIA killed their undercover agent and stole it. Will explains that Martin was killed by the CIA, and Carrick, who Zahir points out are eliminating any witnesses to the situation. Zahir then reveals Will's family being kept in a room, noting that the only thing keeping them alive is their captivity. Zahir wants to get to Carrick and demands that Will draw her out before the briefcase is sold, or he will release his family to the CIA. Will is then choked out again and thrown out of the car, along with a gun just outside the city. Will returns to Lucia's club where she is happy to see him. The two then begin to formulate a plan to pull Carrick into the open. The club owner overhears the conversation, and noting how Diego was a good friend to him, he decides to help them as well. Lucia then decides to start using her card to pay for drinks, leaving a paper trail for Carrick to follow. A few minutes later, Gorman turns up at the club, but the store owner and his men spot him and a fight ensues. Gorman is good, but they eventually tase him, dropping him. They take Gorman to the basement of the club where they beat him bloody and tie him up. Will asks him about the briefcase and the deal going down, but Gorman refuses to give up any information. Will gets mad, attacking Gorman, then ordering the men to kick his ass. Will then plans to have Gorman escape on purpose, so that he can lead them directly to Carrick. He and Lucia wait outside the club in a car, and very soon, Gorman frees himself from the tapes and they see him escaping. Gorman steals a car and drives away, and Will is right on his tail. Gorman enters an alley and meets with Carrick, and the two drive away under Will's watchful eyes. Will follows them to an underground parking lot and has Lucia wait in the car while he goes after them. He sees Carrick meeting with the buyers, but Zahir and his agents arrive at the parking lot, ordering Will to leave so they can take over, but Will demands to know where his family is. Carrick overhears the noise and kills the buyers. Mossad agents then open fire on the group and a shootout ensues. In the chaos, Gorman grabs the briefcase and jumps into a car, and Will chases after him on foot. Will catches up and jumps into the car, wrestling the briefcase away from Gorman, before a Mossad agent shoots him. Lucia then rams him with her car, causing him to crash. Gorman is dying, noting that he is surprised that Will was the one to kill him. Carrick in her car then turns up speeding towards the briefcase laying on the floor. She fires at Will, forcing him to run for cover, before exiting and grabbing the case. Carrick sees Gorman dead and yells at Will that he is an amateur before driving away. Will and Lucia then take off after her, but Carrick spots them and a high-speed chase ensues. Carrick tries to shake them by driving through a park, but Will is determined to not let her get away. Will catches up with her, but she opens fire at them, forcing him to back off. Carrick thinks that she has lost them and ends up in traffic, but Will spots her and drives straight into her car and crashes into a nearby store. A crowd begins to gather, and Carrick steps out and begins shooting at Will and random people. Will and Lucia jump into a car and take off, and Carrick chases after them, noting she is tired of the chase, and so am I. The two try to run each other off the road, but both cars end up flipping. Carrick gets out of her car with the briefcase, walking over to Will and Lucia, who are struggling to even move. Will tries to go for his gun, but Carrick mocks him and is about to shoot him, when she is suddenly shot. Zahir and other agents turn up and retrieve Will, Lucia and the briefcase, and take them to safety. Zahir takes Will to see his family. On his way, he tells Will that despite Martin being an enemy, he would be proud of Will. He then takes Will to see his family, and they all reunite tearfully. They go to visit Lucia in the hospital, where Jean and Josh get to know her. Afterwards, Will is approached by a CIA official who gives him a passport back home. Will wants to know what was inside the briefcase, but the man tells him that he can only know if he becomes CIA. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more movies like this. Thanks for watching.